Hello, and welcome back to The Doctor Is In. We're picking up our interview from last week with Chris and Andrew of Pharmacann. We hope you're having a happy holiday, and thank you for growing with us.
How important is it to have an R&D designated area? And what tips would you give to other growers in setting one up?
Chris and I were actually thinking about this earlier, and kind of what the first thought that popped in my head is just like every grower is actively doing R&D. Like I've never met a single farmer that doesn't tinker and mess around, with trying to improve their systems. I think that everyone does it. I think it's like a natural calling of that profession of being a farmer is to innovate and improve. And so the best advice to someone who wants to maybe start doing that maybe more purposefully or with more intent is to make sure that they have a good control. You limit your test to a single variable the best you can, and you run a control group alongside your test group at the same time. Don't look at last year's harvest or even last week's harvest, because there's in crop science, the life cycle of the plant, there's so many things going on, which means so many things can go wrong. And so you just want to make sure that any confounding noise or nonsense is happening to both your control group and your test group at the same time. So I would say, I don't know if you got to build a room or a special place for it. You can do a research project anywhere. I mean, I could probably fantasize about the Rolls Royce of a controlled environment growth chamber where you have controls over all these perfectly, these different variables, but I think you can do it anywhere. The biggest advice is to make sure you limit it to one variable and you have a test group and a control group right next, side by side at the same time.
That's excellent advice. Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, yeah, just to add to that, early on, we didn't have by any stretch of the imagination the luxury of controlled environment growth chambers to do this type of R&D. And so it was very much done here in our production facility. And I think for the purpose of production, it can be very important to be doing the R&D in the same space where you're doing production, because those are ultimately the variables that those plants are going to be subject to. Everybody would love to do really cool esoteric applied research in a plant growth chamber. That sounds awesome, right? But especially at the time, we never were going to have, our facilities weren't ever going to be capable of that level of control at that time. So, and especially with how cultivars perform, right? That they need to be subject to normal production environment to make sure that they can be productive in those conditions. And so your experiments need to be able to put plants to the test in those same environments where production's happening. Because we're not just doing this, obviously we're interested from a research perspective, but at the end of the day, these plants have to produce because that's what's paying the bills.
How many plants do you need to trial? I mean, can you do it with 3 plants? Do you need a room that's 500 square feet large?
I just walked one of my research assistants through how to do a power analysis. And so, there's schools of thought that could back that conversation up. We piggybacked in Colorado, where our department started, off of kind of a regulatory requirement. The state mandates that we have to tag every single plant for diversion control. We have to, every single plant that gets grown, we have to track everywhere it goes, put a little barcode on it, and weigh it. Every time you take a leaf off of it, you have to weigh how much that leaf weighs and tell the state you removed a leaf from it. And when you harvest it, you have to tell the state exactly how much that plant weighs. And then the whole total weight, and then you have to separate the bud from it. And then you dry and cure your bud. And then you have to reweigh that. So you know exactly how much, dry bud weight was from that plant. And so what we had to do all that data tracking anyway. And so I saw it as a really awesome opportunity to have really big sample sizes for experiments that it would actually let you do statistical tests on it, because you could start doing ANOVAs and t-tests and get significant differences on maybe even differences that maybe appear to be tiny, because of a 1% or a 2% yield increase really adds up if you could prove that that was significant. So we piggybacked off of that. And so our sample sizes are actually usually pretty huge, but they don't have to be. That ended up being an interesting kind of that was kind of making lemonade out of kind of a tedious regulatory requirement.
Did you say you have to track every leaf?
Yeah.
Like, is that true everywhere?
I can't speak for all the different states, but yeah, there's been some relaxation of rules, especially as we've had an opportunity. The regulators have kind of, they had to write rule. I feel for them. They had to write a bunch of rules really quickly and get this stuff out there and let industry start doing their thing. And so they didn't always hit every ball out of the park, but they, particularly in Colorado, I have to give a lot of kudos there because they've engaged a bunch with plant scientists and have been opening to learning. And with the whole tracking every leaf thing, it got a little bit easier. We were able to kind of communicate where the cannabinoids are in the plant and what parts of the plant you should be more or not at all concerned with. And so we got a little bit of relaxation there. We do still have to track all the discarded leaves that you maybe remove during kind of pruning during the farming process. We have to weigh them all and track that information for the state.
Wow.
Yeah. Talk to any farmer. I know everyone. Sometimes it can be frustrating. I go to a lot of conferences you do that are crop agnostic, and I know it feels like cannabis and everyone else. And I don't know what opinions people have, the other crop farmers have of the cannabis folks, but I hope there could be some appreciation for some of the crazy hoops we have to jump through.
I would definitely say that there are. I moderated a panel once of growers, and I had a lettuce vertical farm grower and a cannabis grower, and and I brought up about lab testing and regulations, and the lettuce grower said like two things. And then the cannabis grower just starts listing, right, a laundry list of things that they have to test for. And you literally, the lettuce farmer's jaw is agape, looking at him like, you have to do all that? Here we're feeding people, right? And we don't even have to do that much testing on the safety of our lettuce. But I think there is an appreciation when they realize all the hoops that you have to go through. They don't always realize all the hoops that you have to go through, but I think the ones that realize that feel for you. Yeah.
To answer your question though, how many do you need? I'm still of the opinion, like Chris had said, doing experiments in production environments where you expose to kind of all the crazy variables that happen is a great way to do it. But to be statistically significant, if you take good data and you could control 3 to 5 plants, that's plenty. But if you have a small number, then it's really important that you replicate.
For sure.
That you do that experiment, a few times to make sure that your findings are consistent.
So, okay, so you guys have now expanded. So you guys expanded from Denver to Michigan as Livewell, and now you guys are with Pharmacann and have some different types of facilities that you maybe inherited or improving upon, and I'm sure there's future plans for expansion. But what have you learned, from this first facility in Denver, and kind of how it was built and operated, and then moving into Michigan, you guys got to, basically design it from scratch. And now you have these new inherited facilities. What have you learned along the way about the different types of facilities and the pros and cons of each of those types of facilities that you're growing plants in?
I guess I could start this. This is kind of a loaded question.
Yeah, I know. You're welcome.
Obviously, Andrew and I come from indoor cultivation, controlled environment, indoor cultivation, at least in a commercial professional sense. That's what we've primarily done as Livewell prior to the merger, and now we're Pharmacann, obviously, and we're in 8 states now, and a number of those states are greenhouses or some hybrid style thereof. Many of them are sealed greenhouses with mechanical cooling and heating and LED lights and shade curtains and all that stuff. So you have a lot of the luxuries of an indoor facility, but it does have a glass roof. And then we've got some greenhouses that are open where we're still, using mechanical ventilation and vents and wet walls and things like that. So, it's been very interesting for Andrew and I taking on the Pharmacann, or what was the legacy Pharmacann states, and becoming extremely familiarized with how to do it in the greenhouse. And the Pharmacann team brought a lot of experience and knowledge with them as well in the merger. So it's been very helpful working with some of our kind of our key players in those states that are operating greenhouses. And I think it's been very synergistic in that regard, where we have a lot of experience from indoor and they've had a lot of experience with greenhouse, and we've kind of been able to come together and merge those two sets of expertise to try and improve the efficiencies where we can in the greenhouse based on that combined knowledge.
What was one of the biggest learning curves that you had in terms of trying to grow in a greenhouse or operate a greenhouse? Crickets.
Trying to think of a good example. I was trying to think of diplomatic examples. Because going from indoor to greenhouse, I mean, indoor is just built on really strict controls, and I know that there are very high tech greenhouses there that can hit set points perfectly and consistently, day in day out across seasons, depending on their geographies. It's possible, but yeah, greenhouses, I think we had to relax our expectations of what our set points, like what our ideal set points were for environmental conditions. And I think it was, I think it was eye-opening to realize you can grow your crops anywhere under a lot of conditions. So you can get it, like you can grow good plants. And I think some of the lessons would be like, man, summers are hot. Like that's like some of those like no duh lessons that I think anyone who's just listening to this who grows in the greenhouse would be like, those idiots. But like that's not something that Chris and I necessarily had to deal with in an indoor farm before. So there's like, that was my easy answer, I guess.
Well, now are you saying, oh my God, it can get really cold in a greenhouse?
Yeah, this is our first winter with Pharmacann heading into those seasons, and so yeah, the outside temperatures and humidities change, and that affects your indoor systems. And so there's a lot. I think one thing we've realized is that I think this is true regardless if it's a greenhouse or indoor farm, that every facility is its kind of own unique individual. It has its own identity, and it's its own little spaceship with its different levers and buttons and quirks. And you gotta it takes a long time to learn a new facility and kind of learn how to talk to it and get it to
are the plants the aliens in that analogy?
I'm not the plant lover. I feel like I'm the alien.
Oh, even better.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of you're just kind of we're like learning a new instrument, it feels like.
Yeah. I mean, I like that you said that you kind of learned that plants can tolerate maybe a wider range of conditions than you're able to control in an indoor facility. Do you think, I mean, I know you guys are still new to it. You haven't even gone through an entire year of running a greenhouse facility, but do you think there could be benefits, or is it only downsides of growing cannabis in greenhouses versus an indoor facility? And maybe that has to do with the crop yield and quality, or maybe that has to do with efficiency, or maybe that has to do with, I don't know, access to sun, whatever.
Yeah, that's another loaded question, Nadia.
Did you expect they'd all be softballs?
No, yeah, but I think Chris and I could probably go in a lot of different directions here. I certainly geographically where you're cultivating is a big factor for the suitability of what kind of structure you want to build.
And all those facilities at Pharmacann are like the Northeast and Midwest, right? Like those are not necessarily easy locations to grow in a greenhouse.
No, yeah, hot and humid in the summer.
And then blizzardy cold in the winter, right?
Yeah, but yeah, you get, the classic talking points that you get the efficiencies of getting the sunlight for free. And I think that greenhouse technology is really coming. Chris and I were talking about this earlier. Greenhouse technology is really advancing, where kind of the lines blurring between kind of indoor farming controlled ag and greenhouse, and the most complex greenhouses have mechanical cooling and air filtration, and they've been doing water circulation for a long time. The same way as the lowest tech greenhouse you could think of starts blurring the line to being practically an outdoor farm. I think that spectrum is kind of, I think any kind of gap between those three paradigms of cultivation, outdoor, greenhouse, and indoor, I think that spectrum is kind of getting filled out. The gaps are getting filled out, and you can, when you ask greenhouse versus indoor, I got to ask you a bunch of follow-up qualifying questions.
Fair.
I noticed here that you actually quoted me saying a year ago to one of your colleagues at MJ BizCon that I said something similar, or maybe verbatim, that indoor is the future of cannabis cultivation.
Yeah. Do you still believe that?
I kind of want to walk that back a little bit. Andrew and I talked about this a little bit this week before the call. And yeah, that was a year ago, right, when the merger happened, right? And we were taking on all these greenhouse facilities. And when I say walk it back, I kind of want to give that with a caveat, which is it's going to be extremely dependent on what the product is that we're trying to produce, right?
Yeah.
And then also we really have to factor in consistency, right? So seasonally speaking, in a greenhouse, I guess it depends on the level of control. At some point, you're just building an indoor facility with a glass roof, okay? And then there's the semantics there of how much of that is really a greenhouse anymore. But seasonally speaking, even in some of these hybrid houses or mechanically cooled, heated greenhouse systems, we are seeing seasonal differences in potency, as an example, or flower density. And when, as the market continues to compress and we have to provide a product to the consumer that is consistent, especially when you're talking about flower, like smokable flower product, we need to establish brand consistency and quality. And I still think that controlled indoor growing, it provides the highest level of consistency and product quality throughout the year. And that's how you build your business models and your yield forecasting and your sales plan. So yeah, I still do think that, when it comes down to smokable flower, that kind of high quality product, it is kind of looking like indoor is the way to go. And then, some of the other things that factor in is like the regulatory framework, the requirements, the testing requirements, the cannabis, total yeast and mold, all of those things that we have to conform to. And what it's looking like is those things are only going to tighten down and become more strict. And so that kind of forces our hand a little bit too, to move towards an environment where we can control all of these variables to produce that level of product.
Yeah. I know greenhouse guys who are, their greenhouse is built adjacent to acreage of outdoor crops that's planting some other system. And, they're relying on good relationships of phone calls about not flying the airplanes over to apply pesticides when the wind's blowing in a certain direction. And, that kind of neighborly trust can only go so far. But if you get a whole batch, if you get a whole crop that gets some spray drift and pesticides, that's a lot of plant material that you got to waste. And then so if you want to put air filtration, HEPA filtration on your makeup air in your greenhouse, you're kind of iteratively getting steps closer towards it just being an indoor farm with a transparent roof.
Right. Have you, Chris? I'm glad you brought up quality, because that's something that I'm hearing more cannabis growers especially talk about, especially, in this sort of race to the bottom and, just high supply, at least here in California. I don't know how saturated a lot of other markets are, but here in California, certainly it's an issue. And I feel like a lot of investors are like, pedal to the metal, wanting more yield, right? More to make up for the lost revenue of lower prices, which to me seems very counterintuitive, because then you're just glutting the market even more and there's your race to the bottom. But some of the smart growers are saying, well, yes, yield, but also quality, that's going to be the differentiator ultimately in the market. And like you were saying, being consistent, finding cultivars or finding techniques that make you stand out from the crowd, right, in terms of quality, or maintaining your shelf space, as we would say in the produce market. I don't know if you guys use the same terminology in cannabis with dispensaries, but you want to be a consistent brand, like you were saying. I mean, how much does that factor in to what you guys are doing? And even when we're talking about greenhouse versus indoor, and okay, so you have inconsistent quality characteristics, maybe from summer to fall to winter, et cetera. I mean, what do you think about the quality of greenhouse grown cannabis compared to indoor? Do you see sometimes it's better and sometimes it's worse, or is it always worse? Or how do you even qualify quality?
Well, that's another great question. I think that you can get absolutely excellent quality out of a greenhouse. We've seen it. We do it. We have a number of, obviously, greenhouses that produce a really high quality product. The question is how is it goes back to the consistency question, right? Like, I need to be able to produce that high quality of product, year round, day in, day out. This cultivar needs to be the same. Yeah, I think it's a bit of a challenge there to be able to do that consistently in a greenhouse. And then I think maybe another aspect too is kind of looking to the future and this race to the bottom, as you said. Presumably someday, the federal legalization is on the horizon, right? So if and when that does happen, you're going to be your client base now, could be the country, and so the brand consistency is even more important, right? So, we need to be able to provide that same cultivar in a much wider population. It needs to be the same and consistent. Again, I think it's going to come down to the product type.
Why does the cultivar need to be the same? Well, why couldn't you change it from summer to winter, or can you?
Our customers kind of dictate that, right?
Do they?
Yeah, we seem to get a lot of questions. People like new, people like variety, but then you also get strains that become trending or popular, and then you have some consistent varieties or lines that have been around for years and are kind of expected and well loved. And also there's a freshness component. You can't just grow acres and acres and acres and harvest once a year and then hold that product and sell it. You don't have like big bountiful harvests and then sell it year round with the same kind of freshness standard. So when you're talking about quality, being able to kind of consistently harvest year round is really important, which can be done in a greenhouse as well as an indoor farm. And so kind of keeping that freshness and quality for a high quality product tends to be more favorable in a controlled environment. In terms of like consumer preference, right now everyone is pretty obsessed with THC concentration. It's kind of I think it's being a little falsely equated to the equivalent of like maybe alcohol content of a beer or wine. It's the active ingredient of interest, and I think people have this thinking that a higher number is more bang for your buck, and so that's what they're looking for on the shelves. I think there's a lot of data and evidence out there that's showing that there's not that tight of a correlation between absolute potency and then the effects of that product, and so I'd hope to see maybe that trend fade out, but cannabis customers are keenly aware of the quality metrics and very, very discerning. Like I don't know if I've ever heard like the tomato folks talk about customers asking them what the lycopene percentage is of, their heirloom varieties. I don't, the consumers have like molecular knowledge of our crop, and so, which is awesome, but that it's high standards, and growing that consistently year round, and like Chris was saying, kind of also in concert with your supply chain too, to make that freshness demand. Also pushes us towards kind of favoring some indoor systems, or increased control, because I know like in the wintertime, depending on your region, if you're using supplemental light for daylight extension, we also are, for hitting your consistent yields, you're also considering, I need supplemental light for DLI extension. And if I'm going to be putting so much supplemental lighting into my greenhouse to hit my DLI targets, so that's a big capital investment. That's a lot of lights. And then my energy bill, I'm going to be running all those lights. So you start getting these, trade-offs from some of the classic pros of glasshouse growing, and you start making those investments in your technology anyway, to be hitting your quality standards and your productivity standards year round. So yeah.
Cannabis is interesting, right? Because I mean, one of the quality characteristics that it has is a quantitative number, is this THC percentage or CBD percentage, or this percentage value. And just like you said, there you don't go to the produce aisle and look for lycopene content, or something similar for other produce.
How much carotenoids are in your carrots?
Yeah, exactly. We're like, oh, that looks pretty, or oh, just give me that bag that's already prepackaged for me, and I trust that it's good for me, and it tastes good, or I'm going to put it in my stew, and it's going to make it thicker, whatever it is. And that might be the quality that you're looking for. I think that's a really interesting comparison to make, and it's sort of ironic to have cannabis that has this quantitative metric of quality that might not even matter that much. I mean, it matters, but how much value we put on it might not matter as much. I have a question. What is the shelf life of cannabis? Like, once you've packaged it up, I've never asked this question before. Like, is it like good for 3 months, 6 months? Like, once it's in a sealed container?
I think it depends a lot on the packaging type and the storage condition.
Okay.
So yeah, I know
All of that.
It's always annoying to ask a question and just
it's fine.
Receive follow-up questions, but yeah, I think it has a lot to do with how you package it, how you store it. But I think traditionally, and this is a topic that's getting discussed, in regulatory environments,
Mm-hmm.
and I think brands are asking themselves that question, because you want to make sure that your consumer is always getting fresh, high quality product. And so I think that we found in our experience that 4 to 6 months is kind of an upper limit, and
Okay.
and you can do things, like I said, packaging and storage conditions to extend that life. Or if you don't have those things in control, you're going to have an even shorter shelf life than that. It totally depends. It depends on your environment. Are you in Colorado, where the humidity? Are you in a desert climate in the Southwest US, where the humidity is really low? Because you could, you leave that out on your kitchen table for a day, and it's going to dry out.
Yeah.
So if that's drier than you want it to. So we also have to have, there's a bit about education about, consumers when they take a product and bring it home. If they bought an ounce and they'd like that ounce to last them for the month, kind of storing that correctly, keeping the lid on it, or, cigar connoisseur.
I was going to say, we stick it in our humidor if we know we're going to keep some joints around for a while. Goes in the humidor with the cigars.
Right. Yeah, there's only so much you can do after it leaves the store. But yeah, I'd say that's probably about. I think people would say that's about average.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'd say people have very strong opinions too about how long a smokable flower is good for shelf life wise. But yeah, I think to Andrew's point, it's all about optimizing the storage conditions, and then making sure that you're producing at a rate which is consistent with your retail.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, what does the word efficiency mean to you guys?
There's a big gear switch.
I know you're
But Yeah, intellectual whiplash. All right.
I gave you no segue on that one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think Chris and I think about it a lot from like resource use efficiency and how do we take the resources that we have and use those to make the most of what you have. And so for energy or water or labor, how can you if you're limited on resources, how can you do the most with what you've got? So, and then without obviously we just talked about sacrificing quality. So you kind of have to, it's a process. How do you tune your process so that you're using you're conscientious of the resources you're using that may or may not be finite, but they affect your bottom line, and then making the most product you're still hitting your quality standard. That's probably the most generic answer I could give.
Do you have an example where you maybe discovered that less was more? We talked about having more light, right? 1% more light, 1% more yield. Have you come across anything where giving the plant less produced more of something?
Well, I guess with LED technology and the ability to control the environments, we have certainly started to find what the upper threshold is for light.
Okay.
Because obviously with LED, one of the cool aspects about it is we have an opportunity to push higher levels of light than was traditionally thought possible before under HID light. And so I think obviously there's a lot of interest to find out where that ceiling is with this 1% light equals 1% yield. And so we have been working quite a bit to kind of push the envelope and find out where that is. How much light is too much light to put into a facility. And I think we've started to find where that range is, and again it becomes kind of a cultivar specific conversation, right? Some cultivars can take more light than others, and one of the really nice things about LEDs is we can cater that, or we can have dynamic dimming set points for our lights for specific cultivars that can take additional light versus ones that might not be able to tolerate quite as much. So I think light is an example of, there is certainly a too much factor, right? Where we do need to back it down because we're starting to see, poor crop health or maybe non-advantageous growth that isn't of interest to us from a production standpoint.
What about even like irrigation, fertilizers, HVAC? Like is some thoughts that come to my mind is, did you start with maybe a higher irrigation or fertilizer rate and reduce that over, found what the threshold, and you're like, oh no, we can scale this back a little bit and still get, what the product yield or quality that we want? Or have you kind of stuck by your original irrigation or fertilization rates?
Yeah, I think all of our parameters, we've gone through that exercise of finding the Goldilocks, setting, and you try to push your crop, with more food, maybe more nitrogen or something, until you either hit, it's either a stress response or you're not getting, you don't get more out of your plant. It could either be toxic or just not getting more improvement. And so you find those lines, and you try going back the other direction and doing less of something, and until you hone in on that kind of that Goldilocks just right level. And I think we've kind of done that with all aspects of our cultivation. We're not done. I've always told our ownership team that I will retire when I run out of ideas to like.
So never.
If I have nothing left to test or work on, I'll let them know. And that hasn't happened yet. But yeah, I think we went through that process with a lot of things, with fertilizer, what's the EC until they're right at that optimal level, with how much water to give and how often. I think we've done that for just about everything.
When you talk to other growers, as I know you do, what advice? Well, what I want to ask is, what do they ask you? Are they asking you for advice? Are they asking you like what your experience was like, or I mean, you know, kind of like how I introduced at the beginning, you guys have been around for a long time, and I'm sure that, you know, I know growers look up to you. You're probably mentors when you don't even realize it in some cases. But how has the interaction been with other growers, and what kind of questions do they ask you? I mean, you don't even have to give the answers. I'm just curious. Like, do they ask you the same questions I asked you? Like, would you ever grow in a greenhouse? Or do they ask you, you know, what's your experience like with, you know, operating a central plant? Or what was your experience like with Argus? I mean, you know, anything.
Yeah, I think everyone always takes any opportunity to compare notes. So I'm not sure how much I felt like I'm in any kind of mentorship role, or people are coming to ask, you know, how does Live Well do it specifically? But I think, yeah, I think growers are constantly comparing notes. What did you think of this vendor? Did it break on you the day you got it? Did it last a long time? You know, what do you
Mm.
think of? Do you like to lower temperatures at this time during the night, or do you like to change your feed strength at this time during the, you know, this phase of the flower development? I think everyone's constantly trying to find out if there's something they could be doing better, or to confirm if what they're doing is correct. I think people do that a lot. I think it covers all. It kind of covers all the topics. It's almost there's you could put, it's annoying if you put two growers together at the same dinner table. Like, that's all they'll talk about. So that, I
I
think that's,
like listening to those two
yeah.
growers talk, though.
Well, I would be one of them.
I
Uh,
know.
yeah, I think that's been my experience.
Yeah, I would agree. I think a lot of it is like confirmation, validation of what you're currently doing, and
Mm,
oftentimes comparing notes. Because it doesn't matter to me, like, what the size of the operation is that you work at, or I'm interested in your experience, because oftentimes there's parallels that we can discuss, that we both see, or you know something that I haven't thought about, or I have this interesting question about drying and curing. What are your opinions on it? So I think just kind of a lot of like bouncing ideas off each other, and everybody wants to feel like what we know now is consistent with what other people are seeing in the field, and kind of reinforcement of procedures that we're already doing. Because right now it seems like it's a lot of like small incremental changes, right? We've done, I think, as an industry, we've done a lot of heavy lifting over the years to get to where we're at now. And so now the gains, I think, are smaller, the efficiency gains or
mm.
quality gains. And so, yeah, it's really just more detail oriented conversation around really specific aspects of the process and how we can optimize those.
I tend to also be in, I think the situations I put myself in where I'm meeting other growers tends to be at forums where kind of the bar is high, and it's kind of like-minded people seeking knowledge, or techniques to learn from, you know, other engineers or other vendors, or other experts in research or something. So those conversations tend to be, I've always just been fairly impressed with kind of the level of know-how that I've seen improve within the industry over the 10 years I've been in it. So those have been the interactions I've had. Every now and again, I feel like we have an opportunity to kind of educate or communicate. I know a few years ago, this was maybe like 2019 or something, the Denver updated their energy code to have a requirement for indoor horticulture buildings to have a minimum photon efficacy for their lighting fixtures, and which pretty much meant you had to go LED. I think there were some carve outs that allowed some extreme examples of like double-ended HPS that could conform, but in general, it's pretty much an energy code that said all new construction had to go LED. And so I was engaged in that process, and at the end of it, was feeling like they made that energy code and growers were going to be affected by it. And so I'd volunteered with Live Well to kind of do like to give a talk about, to anyone who had any questions about growing under LEDs, and what my experience was in converting from HPS to LED, and the research I did to kind of convince myself and my owners that this was going to be okay. And so I kind of walked walked growers in Denver kind of through that talk. I remember a lot of people coming up afterwards and asking me more questions because I kind of had to cram all that information into a quick little talk. And a lot of people came up and asked more questions about that. Just looking for like Chris was saying earlier, just kind of looking for confirmation. Like, if you did it, it's going to be okay if I do it. I just want to double check. I think everyone's happy to hear that they're on the right track. And so, but yeah, like Chris said, I don't know if scale always matters. It's no matter how big you are, you kind of your challenges are the same, and you're worried about the same stuff. You're worried about your plants for all the same reasons.
Has the industry and growers in cannabis always been so collaborative and open like you guys are describing? Or do you think there's been a period, or there still are some niches where it's, I don't know, maybe more on the competitive side, where closed down, where people aren't talking about what they're doing?
I think it depends who you ask.
Yeah.
I think some people, I don't know if it's ego or if they're just kind of posturing for brand recognition, but there's definitely people out there that like to get high on the smell of their own farts and just think that the way they do it is the best, and they don't want to tell anyone what the secret sauce is.
Yeah.
I really kind of feel like that maybe is the exception to the rule. I've always been pretty open about talking about this stuff. I'm a big believer of high tides raise all ships, and
Yeah.
I see that a lot. I think that's the norm in the community, is to talk pretty openly about it. Because for a lot of these people, it's like a passion first. There's like a really strong culture around the product and the practice of doing the farming, and obviously it's a business, and people have trade secrets and stuff like that. But I think that there's a lot of people engage in that open communication.
What were you going to say, Chris?
No, I kind of agree with, I certainly agree with what Andrew is saying. And I would say that early on in the cannabis space, people were really guarded, and everybody thought they had some secret sauce method for how they did their particular practice. And yeah, a lot of people were standoffish, unwilling to share, or even like tore you through their grow, And I think over the last 10 years, that's 12 years, that's completely changed. People are operating at such a high level now that, even the conversations are happening at such a high level now, you just have to have kind of so much knowledge anyway to even like really talk about these concepts, that I think it has just become a big open forum,
Yeah. I feel like, when I talk to cannabis growers, you guys talk a lot about working with others and conferring with each other. Like you said, validating or confirming the practices and the technologies that you're using. I don't always feel like that in the vertical farming space. And I'm, that industry there is definitely a push, right, for them to be more transparent, to talk more about what they're doing. Because
do you think that the scale thing, Nadia, do you think that's truer for bigger vertical farming?
For
So
sure.
I think for smaller scale vertical farming, that it's wide open books.
I think smaller is less of that competition, but I mean, it's investor driven is what I would say, right? It's not grower driven.
Biotechnology and investment.
Yeah, because they're investing there, and what you just said, in technology, not in the plant necessarily. And we're seeing a lot of failures in that industry, and I wonder, right? I think a few of us wonder, how much more successful could that industry be if they would not open your books. Like, we don't need to know everything, but just be more open, be more collaborative, talk more at least about the failure, so that everybody doesn't go down the failed route, right? And so that at least we're focused on new ideas and on the successes and not just the failures. And so, that's kind of why I wanted to ask your question, because, when I first started 6 or 7 years ago, cannabis also felt very guarded, like you said, Chris, and people weren't talking much, and it was across both of those industries. But something shifted, and I don't know what it was in the cannabis industry, where all of a sudden it became much more open, but vertical farming didn't take that same path. It stayed guarded. And I don't know if you know what that switch was. Maybe there are just enough growers, right? Maybe vertical farming hasn't reached a critical mass yet right? Of success, of people doing the same thing to collaborate the same way.
Yeah.
Maybe they're competing for smaller markets or bigger markets. I have no idea. I don't.
I'm not much of a finance guy, so I really can't really speak to this stuff about kind of investor
Yeah.
kind of the way that works. But maybe I have a suspicion it has something to do with that. But yeah, I know like on the hobby level, people love talking about farming for themselves and how I can make my own herbs in my kitchen and make my own produce in my
And
backyard.
hydroponics in general, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I see a really thriving community about that. It seems to be about the people feeling like they have the secret sauce to scale it,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to stay guarded about that. But yeah, I like the open and collaborative nature. Learn a lot, especially learn a lot like talking to vendors and stuff, kind of sharing all of our successes and failures back to the vendors, the people that make the equipment and
Yeah, because
technology.
they're going to make the equipment better if you tell them what's working and not working.
Right. So yeah, always love engaging with people that way, the people that make the stuff that we use. Because yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know how to make that stuff. That's not what I do. So, yeah.
And for for myself, I appreciate that you guys will tell us that, well, most of you guys have told us we've been successful, so of course I appreciate that. But like just getting that feedback, right? I mean, that's really what we're looking for, is to know that we're doing a good job, that we're meeting your needs, whether you're selling a product or selling a service like we do. We're only going to stay in business if we continue to help people like you. And if we're not doing a good job, I would think all of us would want to know so that we can try to do better or go elsewhere, I guess. So, all right. So just kind of wrapping up here, how do you guys predict this industry is going to evolve over the next, I don't know, few years to 10 years?
It seems like, I mean, probably the obvious one is some form of legalization.
At the federal level?
At a federal level, and slowly over a global level. Europe, Germany just recently, I think, moved to legalize, and so Europe, and it'll I think that'll happen. So I think that'll shift a lot of stuff when it comes to banking and tax codes and stuff like that. I mean, it'll be really good for the industry and adoption. I think like we just talked about now, but manufacturers getting better at what they do and cultivators getting better at what they do. I think we're going to see that. I think that's going to continuous improvement. It's going to be better efficiency. You're going to see probably more like the rest of agriculture, where there's some giants emerge in the biotechnology side, where you get a lot more, the breeding and the development of new strains, and the creation of more efficient technologies, farming equipment catered to this plant. I think you're going to keep seeing that stuff come out more and more as it gets developed. So I think you're going to see higher tech, because there's been 100 years of prohibition. We kind of missed cannabis, kind of missed all those gains that all the other crop sectors got to do. So there's kind of this explosive catch up that's happening right now.
Yeah. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I also think automation, cannabis is a very resource intensive crop. Obviously, inputs like, electricity and resources, fertilizer inputs, all that type of stuff, but also labor. I mean, it's a needy crop. There's a lot of specificity to it that right now requires a lot of hands. And kind of in that same vein of what Andrew was saying, we've got to kind of catch up to where commercial ag is. They're doing in these, multi-hectare glass houses, officially producing tomatoes or whatever the crop is. So I think that's what we're going to see a lot of develop. And I think a lot of the reason why it hasn't developed is because of the fact that everything's siloed by state, right? So there's only so much demand in a state. So I can only have so much cultivation in a state, and to be efficient at that scale and to need that level of automation, you have to be producing a certain, volume of product for it to make sense. And so I think that the current regulations and laws is kind of been holding us back in that way, because we haven't had the need to scale up that large to service a wider market to where automation always makes sense. the way it does in commercialized greenhouse crops.
That's a really good point. If cannabis, assuming cannabis in the near future, it will, is rescheduled or descheduled, and all of a sudden, right, our land grant universities can start doing research on, on cannabis and not just hemp, or marijuana, I guess, and not just hemp. What is an area of need? Like right now, if you were talking to an academic researcher and they're like, what do you want us to study? What do you want them to study? What's the first thing?
The first thing.
Or the second thing.
Yeah. I think pest management is a category that has a lot of opportunity for research. The cannabis industry has been put into an interesting position, just being federally illegal, where at least in the US, the EPA controls what products are approved for what crops. And it's changed a bit in the last couple of years since the hemp legalized in the Farm Bill, but don't really know a whole lot about pest management tools in cannabis and the effects on the products and the consumers. I think that's a big area of research to focus on. I don't know if you thought I was going to say pest management.
I did not think you were going to say that. What's yours, Chris?
I mean, this is outside of my domain, but I think everybody sees the need, the writing on the wall. I think pharmacological research, if we could really sick, the world of academia on that particular subject matter, because I mean, it's such a complex plant, just with so many compounds that we just are barely scratching the surface on understanding how that interacts with our biology and what type of medicines might be developed with, either whole plant medicine or some constituents thereof of all of these compounds that exist in the plant. I just think there's just so much work to do there. And we're just so limited by not having the ability for research institutions to just, go full tilt.
Yeah. Wow, very different answers. I love that. What? Go ahead.
Now I'm thinking of more.
But so number two.
That's a good one. I'd be curious, the kind of spectrum control. Now that we have LEDs, we've got access to great LEDs. We can do high levels of light intensity. We can tune and change and modulate the spectrums. We know that the plants respond to them differently. It's such a complex process to design all that experimentation to come up with applications of that knowledge. The growers don't necessarily have the time to be tuning all those wavelengths over and over in repeated studies to get this out of their crop or that out of their crop. And so I think there's I think that's going to keep researchers in that space busy for a long time. But what would be great is then to kind of see applications of that come out into kind of commercial products.
Yeah. So EPAR and amber light and UV and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a big. I think there's a bunch. I think there's a bunch to learn there.
Yeah. Nice. I love your different answers. All right. So last question for the both of you, which is, what do cannabis plants crave?
Chris and I talked about this earlier. My answer was attention.
Good one.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, besides Gatorade, I was thinking
or Brondo.
Yeah, Brondo. I think they're mostly craving more engineering and horticultural expertise.
Nice. I agree with that answer. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap this up with my rapid fire questions. So I realize that I have two of you answering these questions. And so if they're different answers, awesome. If they're the same answers, maybe you can just say them in harmony. I don't know. All right. They're just meant to be like really quick responses. If you want to expand on anything, you can, but just like one word, one sentence. All right. Are you guys ready?
Maybe.
Okay. All right. Are cannabis plants introverts or extroverts?
Extroverts.
I would agree.
Yeah. Do you want to say why? You don't have to.
Well, I don't know. They're going to do what they're going to do. They care very little about what we want them to do sometimes, despite our best efforts.
they're real showy. They put themselves out there, like
Yeah.
they're with their flowers and their scents, and yeah,
They're pretty and they smell good.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Can cannabis create a more sustainable world?
Oh,
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, that plant, and I know obviously the sector we're in is growing, adult use and medical use cannabis, and right now hemp is really getting distracted on the CBD side, which is an awesome space to be developing. But there's so many uses for this plant. It used to be such an important plant for our civilization, and this last 100 years that it's been gone has been a shame. They're bringing this plant back for all the other different reasons. I wish more of that would get talked about, but it's kind of in development. I have no doubt that that whole cannabis revolution will take off. I'm not going to say we're distracted. I think that we got to focus on all this stuff, and there's those other uses of that crop I haven't gotten as much attention yet, but
Yeah.
they will.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, for each of you, what's the worst advice you've been given about growing cannabis?
Cross lumens are bad.
Oh, I can't top that.
Cross lumens?
You want me to expand that?
I have no idea what that even means.
We didn't either originally.
Yeah, someone a long time ago told me that, quote, cross lumens are bad. And I think what he meant was that, like, light coming at you want your light to come from above. You don't want your light to come at an angle. And he described lights as lumens. So the cross lumens were bad. You wanted, I don't know if this had to do with like pound per light. And so you're thinking that, the plants underneath the light, that's where your pounds come from. And the lights next to it aren't for that plant.
What?
Hey, you asked me what the worst advice I ever got was, and that was it. Cross lumens are bad.
Wow.
I want somebody who said that to me.
Do you know who said that to you? Do you remember? Okay.
Yeah,
you can tell me offline. And Chris, you can't beat that?
I guess I could go back to some like early on in my professional development with LiveWell. Some advice that was strongly worded to me from some other people in the space was that switching away from these like special hobby line nutrients was never going to work. Like you just can't recreate the magic that they put in those bottles and slap 100x price tag on. That this is not possible.
There's so many parts, and that chart has all the colors on it.
Right.
You gotta,
pretty things and feed charts and like that. You're never going to replicate that magic. So
don't even try.
Yeah.
And so then you went and tried. You're like, screw you.
Yeah.
If you could tell a new grower to do anything, what would it be?
Try hard.
Be open, ask questions.
Great answers. What has the cannabis plant taught you guys?
Resilience.
That's good.
There's always more that I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, last question. Flower, edible, or vape?
Flower,
for sure. No contest.
Agreed. Awesome. That's it.
Cool. That was fun.
Yeah, that was fun.
Well, thanks guys so much for spending 2 hours with me today. I was wondering how long we might go with interviewing two of you. You guys have been my first twofer. Yeah. So thank you for that. Yeah. Thanks for the interaction. Thanks for the discussion. This was fun, and I got to learn more about you, which is awesome. So yeah. Yeah,
our pleasure. We probably could have done 2 more hours.
Of course.
So much to talk about. So yeah, we really appreciate you having us. We've never forgotten that conference in Panama. We've always had a heck of a lot of respect for you and learned so much from you. So we feel like it's a big honor that you invited us to come on to your show. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Nadia. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I know we've all wanted to do this for a long time, so I'm glad we got to finally make it happen.
Me too. The perfect episode to do it. So, all right. Well, thanks guys. Happy holidays. I don't know if I'll get to talk to you before the new year again. But it was really fun, and thanks again for commemorating this special episode. I realize you're not just the 25th interview. In a way, you're the 25th and the 26th interview. All right, have a great rest of your day.
Take care.
Care.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.